Hannah, why did you approve this without telling me? Ethan Cole's question cut through the conference room so cleanly that even the soft hum of the air conditioner seemed to disappear. He thought questioning her in front of everyone might protect the company they had spent 3 years building, but he had no idea that the document lying between them would soon expose a betrayal far deeper than one disputed approval. Hannah Miller sat perfectly still at the long walnut table, wearing the same simple light blue blouse she had worn to work that morning. At 25, she looked younger than most people in the room, especially beside the accountants, advisors, and prospective investor representatives surrounding her. Yet her expression remained steady as she reached for the financial compliance record Ethan had pushed across the table. "I did not approve this," she said. Ethan leaned back slightly. "Your credentials are attached to it." "I can see that." Hannah studied the timestamp. Tuesday for 17 p.m. The approval appeared legitimate. Her employee identification was there. Her authorization level was there. Even the digital record carried information connected to her account. Across the table, their accountant, Mark Reynolds, lowered his eyes toward his notes. No one accused Hannah directly, but suspicion had already entered the room. She could feel it in every careful silence. Ethan tapped the page with one finger. This authorization changed the financial access connected to the due diligence process. "We need to understand why." Hannah slowly looked up. "Then we should understand it before deciding who is responsible." Ethan's jaw tightened. Only a month earlier, he would have answered differently. He would have said that he trusted her. He would have reminded everyone that Hannah had handled operations since the company was little more than 2 desks, borrowed equipment, and a checking account that barely covered rent. Instead, he glanced toward the investor representatives. That single movement told Hannah what frightened him most. It was not losing her trust. It was losing the deal. "Until we know what happened," Ethan said, "we may need to restrict financial access." The words landed quietly. Hannah stared at the man who had once promised that neither of them would ever make a major decision without the other. "My access?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. Temporarily. No one moved. Hannah closed the folder and placed both hands on the table. She did not raise her voice. "Preserve every record," she said. "Every login, every approval, every account change, and every timestamp. Do not delete or modify anything." Mark nodded immediately. "We can do that." Ethan looked at her. "Hannah, this is not personal." Her eyes remained calm, but something behind them had changed. "You made it personal when you decided suspicion was enough to stop trusting me." The room went silent. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Hannah stood, gathered her notebook, and walked toward the door without defending herself again. She knew arguments could be dismissed. Records could not. As the conference room door closed behind her, Ethan looked down at the approval carrying Hannah's credentials. He believed the document had created the problem. What he did not yet understand was that the real damage had begun earlier, with a decision he had made without her knowledge, and the truth was already waiting inside the records he had just agreed to preserve. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Cole would have laughed at the idea that a financial record could ever make him doubt Hannah Miller. Back then, trust between them had seemed almost ordinary because neither of them had ever been forced to measure it. Their company had begun 3 years earlier in a cramped second-floor office above a family-owned hardware store, where the winter heat worked unpredictably and the windows rattled whenever delivery trucks passed below. They had 2 used desks, 1 aging printer, and barely enough money in their business account to cover the next month of rent. Ethan had brought confidence, energy, and an instinct for winning people over. Hannah had brought patience, discipline, and an ability to notice the details everyone else rushed past. When Ethan promised a client something ambitious, Hannah figured out how to deliver it. When Hannah worried they were taking on too much, Ethan found another customer and somehow convinced her that the risk was worth considering. They disagreed often, but they had one rule that mattered more than every other policy they eventually created. Major decisions belonged to both of them. As the company grew, their differences became strengths. Hannah built reliable operating procedures, maintained client relationships, reviewed expenses, and insisted that every commitment could actually be fulfilled. Ethan handled presentations, partnerships, and new business development. Within 3 years, the 2 desks became 14. The tiny upstairs office became a polished workspace outside Columbus, Ohio, and the company finally had enough recurring revenue that neither founder had to wonder whether payroll would clear on Friday. Hannah still drove the same practical sedan and usually arrived in simple blouses and comfortable shoes. Ethan increasingly wore tailored jackets and spent more time at regional business events, where people began describing him as the visionary behind the company. Hannah never corrected them. Recognition had never interested her as much as stability. Then, on a Monday morning in early September, Ethan entered her office carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression Hannah had learned to recognize whenever he believed he had found something enormous. "We have an offer," he said. Hannah looked up from a vendor report. "From whom?" Ethan sat across from her and opened the portfolio. "Northbridge Capital. They want to fund regional expansion." Hannah stared at him. Northbridge was considerably larger than any organization they had previously negotiated with. "How much expansion?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Cincinnati first. Indianapolis after that. Possibly Louisville within 18 months. Hannah lowered the report. "And what do they want in return?" His smile faded only slightly. "Equity. Board involvement. Some restructuring." Hannah reached for the documents. Ethan watched her turn the first page, already imagining new offices, larger accounts, and the kind of growth he had spent years chasing. Hannah imagined something different. More employees depended on them. Now, more clients trusted them. Growth was no longer merely a gamble involving 2 founders and an unreliable printer. "We should have counsel review every clause," she said. "Of course. And neither of us agrees to anything separately." Ethan gave a short laugh. "When have we ever done that?" Hannah looked at him for a moment, then smiled. "Never. It should have been an easy promise to keep. But ambition rarely announces the moment it begins changing a person. Sometimes it simply makes one opportunity look so important that an old promise suddenly feels negotiable." By Wednesday afternoon, Hannah had read the Northbridge proposal 3 times, and the excitement Ethan carried into her office 2 days earlier had been replaced by a quiet concern she could not ignore. She sat at the small conference table near her office window with the agreement spread before her, several sections marked with yellow tabs. Ethan entered carrying 2 coffees and placed one beside her. "You have that look," he said. Hannah glanced up. "What look?" "The one that means you found something expensive." She almost smiled, but her attention returned to the agreement. "I found something more important than expensive." She turned the document toward him and pointed to a restructuring clause. Northbridge would provide the capital they needed for rapid expansion, but the agreement also granted the investor significant influence over future financing, operational reporting, and certain management decisions if specific growth targets were missed. Ethan read the paragraph, then leaned back. "That is standard protection for an investment this size." "Some protection is standard," Hannah said. "This gives them leverage over decisions we currently make together." Ethan folded his arms. "Only if we miss the targets." "And what happens if the Cincinnati office takes 6 months longer than projected? What happens if Indianapolis costs 20% more than expected? We would be giving someone else influence precisely when the company is under the most pressure." Ethan walked toward the window. Below them, employees crossed the parking lot beneath the bright September sun. 3 years earlier, he and Hannah had celebrated signing a contract worth $12,000. Now Northbridge was discussing an investment large enough to transform everything. "We cannot keep thinking like we are still above that hardware store," he said. Hannah remained seated. "I am not. Sometimes it feels like you are." The words came faster than Ethan intended. Hannah looked at him without answering. He exhaled and softened his voice. "We have 14 employees now. Competitors are expanding. If we wait until every risk disappears, someone else takes the market. I am not asking for zero risk. I am asking us to understand the risk before we sign our names to it." Ethan returned to the table. "Northbridge wants an answer soon. Then they can wait long enough for our attorney and accountant to review everything. They have other companies interested." Hannah closed the agreement. That does not make these clauses safer. Ethan stared at the yellow tabs covering the pages. To him, they looked like obstacles between the company and the future he had imagined. To Hannah, they represented promises that could not easily be taken back. "You always find a reason to slow things down," he said. Her expression changed, not with anger, but disappointment. "And you used to appreciate that." Silence settled between them. Ethan looked away first. Hannah slid the agreement back across the table. "Growing faster is not the same as growing stronger." Ethan gathered the papers. "I will tell Northbridge we need more time. And no decisions without both of us." He paused at the doorway. "No decisions without both of us." Hannah believed him because, until that moment, he had never given her a reason not to. But later that evening, after the office lights had gone dark and Hannah had driven home, Ethan sat alone at his desk staring at an email from Northbridge requesting a private follow-up call. For nearly a minute, he did nothing. Then he clicked accept. The private call lasted only 23 minutes, but it was long enough for Ethan to make the first decision he had ever deliberately hidden from Hannah. Northbridge Capital's representative, Lauren Hayes, spoke calmly from the other end of the line, assuring him that the firm understood why Hannah wanted additional review. "We are not asking you to sign the investment agreement tonight," Lauren said. "We only need enough access to begin preliminary due diligence. If your numbers support the projections you gave us, we can keep the opportunity moving while your attorney reviews the contract." Ethan looked through the glass wall of his dark office. Every desk beyond it was empty. Hannah's office door was closed, her light off. "What kind of access?" he asked. "Financial reports, client revenue summaries, operating expenses, standard internal records. Nothing unusual." Ethan hesitated. Hannah had been explicit. No decisions without both of them. Yet this did not feel like a decision to him. Not a final one. He told himself he was simply preventing Northbridge from walking away while Hannah completed her review. "Send me the requirements," he said. The next morning, Ethan said nothing about the call. Hannah was already meeting with their accountant, Mark Reynolds, discussing the restructuring clauses and preparing questions for their attorney. Ethan passed the conference room twice and nearly walked inside both times. He did not. By Thursday afternoon, Northbridge sent a formal due diligence request. Most of the documents were routine, but one requirement involved temporary access to a secure financial reporting portal used to verify revenue and expense records. Ethan forwarded the technical request to their outside systems administrator, Paul Bennett, explaining that Northbridge needed limited access for review. Paul called within 10 minutes. "Does Hannah know about this?" he asked. Ethan stared at his computer screen. Hannah normally approved changes involving financial permissions because she oversaw operations. "She knows due diligence is part of the discussion," Ethan answered. It was technically true, and somehow that made the answer feel worse. "I need authorization documented," Paul said. Ethan paused. "Use my approval for the temporary account. Keep the permissions limited to reporting." Paul agreed and sent confirmation later that afternoon. Ethan read it once, then archived the email. Nothing happened immediately. That made secrecy easier. Northbridge reviewed reports. Employees continued working. Hannah met with counsel and marked additional sections of the proposed agreement. On Friday morning, she stepped into Ethan's office carrying a revised list of concerns. "Our attorney agrees the control provisions need changes," she said. Ethan nodded while keeping his expression neutral. "Did Northbridge contact you again?" Hannah asked. The question was simple. Ethan had one clean opportunity to tell her everything. Instead, he looked down at the list. "Nothing we need to decide today." Hannah studied him for a moment, then placed the papers on his desk. "Good. I want us aligned before anything moves." "We will be." She left. Ethan remained still after the door closed. The temporary account was supposed to expire after the initial review. He believed the risk was contained. He believed he could explain everything once Northbridge agreed to better terms. Most of all, he believed results would justify the secrecy. What Ethan did not know was that temporary access had changed the company's authorization environment in a way neither he nor Paul had fully considered. Somewhere inside an ordinary audit trail, a small technical connection had already been created. It looked harmless. It would not stay that way. The following Tuesday began like any other workday, which was why Hannah did not recognize it as the morning everything between her and Ethan would change. She arrived shortly before 8, carrying coffee and wearing a simple light blue blouse beneath a charcoal cardigan. By 9, she was reviewing vendor expenses. At 11, she met with a long-term client at their office across town, nearly 12 miles from the company. Hannah left her laptop locked at her desk and returned shortly after 5. Nothing about the day seemed unusual. 2 mornings later, Mark Reynolds appeared in Ethan's doorway holding a printed financial report. "We have a problem," he said. Ethan looked up. Mark placed the report on his desk. During Northbridge's due diligence review, a financial authorization setting had been changed, allowing a group of operating records to be included under broader review permissions than the company normally allowed. The change itself had not moved money or harmed a client account, but it violated the internal approval process Hannah had created. Worse, the audit summary identified Hannah's credentials as the authorization source. Ethan stared at the page. "That does not make sense." "I thought the same thing," Mark said. "But the record is there." Ethan called Hannah into his office. She read the report twice before looking at him. "I did not approve this. It is connected to your account. Then something is wrong with the record or the access process." Ethan wanted to believe her immediately. For 3 years, Hannah had been the person who caught errors before anyone else noticed them. But Northbridge was scheduled to arrive the following morning for a progress meeting, and Ethan could already imagine what an unexplained authorization problem would do to the deal. Fear began speaking louder than loyalty. "We need to discuss this with everyone tomorrow," he said. Hannah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Everyone. Mark, Northbridge, and Paul. We need a complete explanation. Then tell them now that I dispute the approval." Ethan hesitated. Hannah noticed. "Ethan, I will tell them what we know." Her voice became quieter. "You know me." He looked at the report instead of answering. That silence followed them into the conference room the next morning. Lauren Hayes sat with 2 Northbridge representatives on one side of the walnut table. Mark and Paul sat near Ethan. Hannah took the chair opposite them. The record was placed in front of her, showing the Tuesday timestamp. For 17 p.m. Ethan asked the question that would remain with both of them long afterward. "Hannah, why did you approve this without telling me?" She stared at him, stunned less by the accusation than by the person making it. "I did not." Paul explained that the system showed authorization tied to her credentials. Lauren asked whether anyone else had access to Hannah's account. "Not with my permission," Hannah answered. Ethan felt every eye turn toward him. He could have told them about the private call. He could have explained that he had authorized temporary due diligence access without Hannah's knowledge. Instead, he protected the opportunity he feared losing. "Until we understand what happened, we should temporarily restrict Hannah's financial access," he said. The room went silent. Hannah looked at the man who had built a company beside her and realized the deepest betrayal was not that he doubted a record. It was that when forced to choose between their trust and his ambition, he had chosen ambition. She closed the folder carefully. "Preserve everything," she said. Then she stood and walked out with her dignity intact, leaving Ethan with a deal that suddenly seemed far more expensive than anything Northbridge had offered. Hannah did not spend Thursday evening trying to prove Ethan wrong. She spent it trying to understand what the record could not explain. At her kitchen table, with the conference room conversation still replaying in her mind, she opened her paper calendar and stopped at Tuesday. At 3:30 p.m., she had been sitting across town with Daniel Brooks, one of the company's longest-standing clients. Their meeting had lasted until nearly 5. The disputed authorization was recorded at 4:17 p.m. Hannah stared at the time for several seconds. She had not taken her company laptop to the meeting. It had remained locked at her desk. Her phone could view reports, but it was not configured to approve permission changes. For the first time since leaving the office, the weight in her chest eased. The record might carry her credentials, but the timing gave them somewhere legitimate to begin. The next morning, Hannah arrived shortly after 8 and went directly to Mark Reynolds. I need your help preserving the audit trail, she said. Mark closed his office door. I already saved the financial records after you asked yesterday. Good. I was with Daniel Brooks when the authorization happened. I want Paul to compare the approval timestamp with the authentication logs and device records. Nothing altered, nothing reconstructed. Just the original records. Mark nodded. That is reasonable. Paul Bennett joined them by phone 20 minutes later. Hannah explained where she had been and which devices she had used that afternoon. Paul did not promise an answer. Instead, he agreed to export the relevant system logs and preserve them for review. By noon, the first inconsistency appeared. Hannah's normal financial approvals came from her assigned office laptop through the company's standard authentication process. The disputed change did not. It had traveled through a temporary access pathway connected to the due diligence environment. That should not identify Hannah as the person approving it, Mark said. Paul was quiet for a moment. Not directly. But if her authorization role was referenced by a reporting workflow, the summary record might display her role credentials even if the request originated somewhere else. Hannah leaned closer to the speakerphone. Can you determine where it originated? I can determine which access profile initiated the request, Paul said. Give me time. Ethan entered Mark's office just as the call ended. He looked from Mark to Hannah. What is happening? Hannah met his eyes. We found an inconsistency. Ethan's expression changed. What kind? Mark explained that the disputed approval had not followed Hannah's usual device and authentication path. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then Hannah mentioned the temporary due diligence environment. The color seemed to leave his confidence before it left his face. Temporary environment, she asked, watching him carefully. Ethan looked toward Mark, then back at her. Northbridge needed limited reporting access. Hannah's voice remained level. Who authorized that? The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it was long enough to answer her question. I did, Ethan finally said. Hannah did not react immediately. She simply looked at the man who had restricted her access for supposedly making an unauthorized decision while knowing that he had already made one himself. When? She asked. Ethan swallowed. Last week. Her eyes stayed steady. Before you asked me whether Northbridge had contacted you again? Ethan could not look away now. Yes. No one in the office spoke. Hannah had come looking for the truth behind one suspicious record. Instead, she had just uncovered the first undeniable proof that the broken system was not the only thing Ethan had kept from her. By late Friday afternoon, the question was no longer whether Hannah had approved the change. The question was how her authorization role had appeared on a request she had never made. Paul Bennett spent several hours comparing preserved authentication logs, access profiles, and the temporary due diligence configuration Ethan had authorized. At 4:36 p.m., he called Hannah, Ethan, and Mark into a conference call. His voice was measured. I found the path. Hannah sat across from Ethan in Mark's office, her hands resting quietly on the table. Go ahead, she said. Paul explained that when the temporary Northbridge reporting account had been created, it was connected to an existing financial workflow so outside reviewers could verify approved records without receiving unrestricted access. Hannah's role had historically been the final internal authorization reference for that workflow. During configuration, the temporary profile inherited that reference. The system summary later displayed Hannah's credentials because her role was attached to the workflow, not because Hannah had personally initiated the change. Mark leaned toward the speakerphone. Can the original logs distinguish between Hannah and the temporary account? Yes, Paul answered. The initiating profile was the temporary due diligence account. Hannah's office laptop was not involved. Her normal authentication sequence never occurred. Hannah closed her eyes for one brief second. She had known she was innocent, but hearing the technical record confirm it released a tension she had carried since the conference room accusation. Ethan remained motionless. Who requested the configuration that created the temporary account? He asked, although he already knew. You did, Paul said. The room became painfully quiet. Paul continued, explaining that the configuration should have received additional internal review before activation. It was a process failure, not evidence that anyone had intentionally manipulated Hannah's account. Northbridge had used access that the company itself had provided. Hannah looked at Ethan. So there was no approval from me. Correct, Paul said. The summary was misleading. The underlying audit trail is clear. Mark exhaled. Then Hannah needs to be formally cleared immediately. Ethan stared at the tabletop. For days, he had treated Hannah's name beside a digital record as more trustworthy than 3 years of knowing her character. Worse, he had known about the temporary access and had still allowed suspicion to settle on her. There is something else, Hannah said. Ethan raised his eyes. When I asked whether Northbridge contacted you again, you told me there was nothing we needed to decide. He nodded slowly. I remember. You had already decided. Ethan had defended his choice repeatedly in his own mind. He had called it preliminary, temporary, necessary. Now every explanation sounded smaller than the promise he had broken. Yes, he said. I had. Hannah's expression remained composed. And yesterday, when everyone questioned me, you could have told them. Ethan swallowed. Yes. Mark looked away, giving the silence somewhere to go. Ethan finally understood that correcting the technical record would be easy. Correcting what he had done to Hannah would not. I need to tell Northbridge and everyone who was in that room, he said. Hannah did not thank him. You do. Ethan nodded. And I need to tell them the entire truth. For the first time since the deal appeared, he was no longer calculating what honesty might cost the company. He was beginning to understand what dishonesty had already cost them. On Monday morning, Ethan asked everyone who had been present during Hannah's accusation to return to the same conference room. Lauren Hayes arrived with the 2 Northbridge representatives shortly before 10. Mark Reynolds sat near the end of the walnut table, while Paul Bennett joined by speakerphone. Hannah entered last, wearing a simple light blue blouse and carrying only a notebook. She took the same chair she had occupied when Ethan questioned her, but this time she did not look uncertain. Ethan stood at the head of the table with a folder in front of him. For once, he had no presentation prepared and no argument designed to protect the deal. Before we discuss anything related to Northbridge, he began, I need to correct what happened in this room. Lauren folded her hands on the table. Ethan looked directly at Hannah. The financial authorization we attributed to Hannah was not initiated by her. The preserved audit records confirm that her laptop was not used, her normal authentication process did not occur, and she did not approve the access change. Mark placed copies of the audit summary on the table. Ethan continued. The request originated through a temporary due diligence account that I authorized. Lauren's expression tightened with surprise. Hannah remained still. Hannah warned me that we needed additional review before moving forward, Ethan said. I agreed that neither of us would make decisions separately. Then I took a private call with Northbridge and approved temporary reporting access without telling her. The silence in the room deepened. When Hannah later asked whether Northbridge had contacted me, I did not tell her the truth. And when the system summary appeared to connect her credentials to the authorization, I knew there was another access path I had approved, but I did not disclose it immediately. Ethan paused. The admission seemed harder than any investor presentation he had ever given. I was afraid the deal would disappear if there was uncertainty. So I protected the opportunity before I protected my partner. Hannah did nothing wrong. I did. No one rushed to fill the silence. Lauren finally spoke. For the record, Northbridge did not ask you to bypass your internal approval requirements. I understand, Ethan said. The responsibility for that decision is mine. He turned toward Hannah. Your financial access should never have been restricted. Your name should never have been questioned before I disclosed everything I knew. I am sorry. Hannah looked at him for several seconds. There was no satisfaction in her face, only the exhaustion of someone hearing the truth later than she deserved. Thank you for correcting the record, she said. Ethan nodded, but she was not finished. Clearing my name fixes the record. It does not automatically fix us. The room went silent again. Ethan lowered his eyes. I know. Hannah opened her notebook. If we remain partners, there will be no private approvals involving financial access, investor due diligence, or structural changes. Major permissions require documented approval from both founders. Temporary accounts receive independent review. And if either of us believes an opportunity requires secrecy from the other, we walk away from the opportunity. Ethan listened without interrupting. Months earlier, he might have called those requirements cautious. Now they sounded like the price of rebuilding something ambition had nearly destroyed. Agreed, he said. Hannah met his eyes. Agreement is the easy part. Trust will depend on what you do after today. Ethan closed the folder in front of him. For the first time, he understood that forgiveness could not be negotiated like a contract, and trust could not be restored by one confession. It would have to be earned in the ordinary decisions that came next. For months later, the company was smaller than the future Ethan had once imagined, but stronger than the version he had nearly sacrificed everything to create. The Northbridge deal never moved forward. Hannah did not demand that Ethan reject it as punishment, and Ethan did not dramatically walk away to prove his regret. They simply reviewed the revised terms together and decided the expansion still placed too much control outside the company. For the first time in months, the decision belonged equally to both of them. The changes Hannah requested after the investigation became standard policy. Financial permissions required documented approval from both founders. Temporary access accounts received independent review. Investor requests were recorded and shared. No private conversations involving structural decisions remained private. Ethan followed every rule without complaint, even when the process slowed him down. Hannah noticed, but she did not confuse compliance with restored trust. Trust returned in smaller moments. Ethan began forwarding important emails before answering them. When a client requested an unrealistic deadline, he asked Hannah whether operations could support it instead of promising first and solving the problem later. When employees praised him for a successful quarter, he corrected them when Hannah's work was overlooked. None of those actions erased what had happened in the conference room, but they gradually stopped that moment from defining everything that came afterward. Then, on a cold January morning, another opportunity arrived. A regional company based in Indianapolis wanted a strategic partnership that could increase their annual revenue significantly. The proposal required a quick response because several competitors were interested. For months earlier, Ethan would have considered urgency a reason to act. This time, he carried the contract into Hannah's office and placed it gently on her desk. Hannah looked at the document, then at him. "They want an answer by Friday," Ethan said. "That is fast." "It is." He pulled out the chair across from her but did not sit until she gestured toward it. "Their representative asked whether I could give verbal approval today so they could reserve the territory for us." Hannah's expression became still. The situation was almost too familiar. "What did you tell them?" she asked. Ethan looked directly at her. "I told them nothing moves until we both understand it." For several seconds, Hannah said nothing. Outside her office, phones rang softly and employees moved through another ordinary workday. There was no conference room full of witnesses, no public confession, and no dramatic applause. There was only a contract resting between two people who now understood exactly what trust could cost when treated carelessly. Hannah opened the first page. "Then we read it together." Ethan nodded. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing every clause. Hannah found 3 provisions she wanted changed. Ethan found one she had missed. They disagreed over the growth schedule, laughed briefly over an absurdly complicated paragraph, and eventually prepared a joint response. Before Ethan left, Hannah closed the folder. "Ethan." He turned. "I trust you to send it." He froze for half a second. The words were simple, but both understood what they meant. Hannah was not forgetting the betrayal. She was acknowledging the months of choices that followed it. Ethan gave a small nod. "I will copy you." Hannah smiled. "I know." He walked back toward his office carrying the contract, and Hannah watched him go without wondering what he might do behind a closed door. Trust had not returned because the truth erased the past. It returned because the truth changed what they chose to do afterward. And sometimes dignity is restored not when someone says they are sorry, but when their next decision finally proves they understood why the apology mattered.